the first question that I think would be helpful is setting the stage. So talking about what the role of the library looks like in the UK versus in the US. From my experience, and I will set this up as a person to be corrected if that is the case, is that in the US, because of the role of the campus bookstore in provisioning content to students, it is the US library has filled a different role that looks more like student research support, helping them find content, doing their research. Whereas the UK, there is a larger component for helping students get their content and deliver it in the absence of the campus bookstore as it exists. But that is a very rough understanding. But that is what I will lead with. So if you, I guess we can start with the UK. If Andrew or Ken, if one of you wants to start by talking about what the role of the library looks like, and if you need to use my description as a straw man to start, feel free.
I'll start. I wouldn't use it as a straw man because we did have a campus bookstore, but that closed about 3 years ago now. But what I would say is that in addition to that access to content, all of the student research support, all of the academic liaison support. So we specialize in referencing support rather than academic skills. Academic skills here sits both centrally and within faculties, but they've delegated referencing support to us. But we're broadly speaking, I would say, a generalist library service that supports majority of undergraduates, postgraduate taught, and to some extent the PGR students, but predominantly focused largely on those teaching content.
So if I jump in, we at Lancaster still have a campus bookshop, but the role that the library plays on campus in terms of providing content to undergraduates is very much akin to what we've just heard from Ken. We're a small research intensive university, so research collections are important. We haven't got huge research collections, but it's certainly a significant role we play. Electronic content we do have more than in print. But in terms of, I think a great word Ken used, generalist, I'd say we too are, and I think that's actually getting to the nub of it from a UK university point of view, in that I've worked in Big Russell Group University, and still the expectation is that the library provides textbooks in large numbers, and sometimes it's about managing expectations, but that's certainly, I think the role as perceived in the UK.
At the University of San Diego, the burden for textbooks fall on the students. So the campus bookstore, so the students rely heavily on the campus bookstore and Amazon, which I know is kind of a threat to our bookstore. And there's a lot of different advantages and challenges and successes with students finding cheaper textbooks through Amazon, but it backfires on the bookstore. So it's actually in our collection management policy at the library that we do not purchase textbooks. That has always been in our collection management policy. It's unheard of for us to purchase textbooks, specifically when they come with access codes. So then it's limited to one user. So there are various burdens and various reasons why we can't purchase textbooks. However, we actually worked with the Associated Student Government to start a textbook reserves for students who are unable to afford textbooks, to kind of help them out. So it's through the Associated Student Government, but we actually maintain the collection. So we have it at our library and we check them out. So we purchase 1 to 2 copies for different sections. And we have different criteria based on pricing and how many students are actually signed up for the course. And then we also worked with ASG, Associated Student Government, to get on board with BibliU. So the Associated Student Government is paying for it, and we're just helping them manage it and promote it and help students find the material they need.
Yeah, I would say for our library, we are guided by the kind of the departmental learning outcomes, which are certainly tied closely to information literacy skills, teaching student, staff, faculty, and community members, information literacy skills about, basic research. And so, and like Alejandra School, we also, for the longest time and continuing, we also do not use the library budget to purchase textbooks. It's just been the practice. I know as a policy, at least for a long time, officially or not, just because historically our budget has, it's not always been that robust. It's better now, but we've also become very adept at looking for outside sources of funding, whether it's grant funding or donations. So we do have a pretty robust course reserves collection within the library, which is the highest circulating collection, because students know that they can come in and maybe they don't have $200 to pay for, the textbook in a class. They know they can go to the library. We also have the superintendent president also gives the library a set number of dollars each year to split between the fall and spring semesters to purchase more and updated textbooks to add to the course reserves. And this past year, we actually just adopted a new collection. We call it the Books for Bulldogs collection. And so with the course reserves, students can come in and borrow those for 2 hours at a time in the library. And then, of course, during COVID, when they couldn't come inside of the library, we tried to do scanning. And then luckily, that's where we learned about BibliU, so they could borrow the books electronically. And now we have a collection, Books for Bulldogs, where students can borrow many of their textbooks for the entire semester. And we feel like that's really been a game changer. The word has gotten out. But as a whole, so while we do support the textbooks, we do support the the materials needs for students if we have those textbooks, still the primary goal of the library, I think, does remain information literacy and research skills.
That was really helpful. I feel smarter already. I guess one question on the US side of things, as we were talking about the textbook reserve programs, how much have you historically depended on faculty donations of textbooks? Because that's something that's come up, at least in my conversations, where many libraries rely for their reserve program that the professor of a course maybe donates a few copies to the library. And that's part of why this there's no spending on the textbook reserve program, is it's entirely donation dependent. And I was just curious if that's been your experience.
Yeah, historically, for just when I was first hired, I know that was definitely the case because, we didn't have the special funding that we now have. We didn't have the special collections we have now. And the collection was much smaller. And it was very much that each semester, the faculty member would come in and they would say, I just want to double check that my, 2 copies, the organic chemistry book, are still here. Or, hey, we just changed editions in the physiology class, so here's the new textbook, and so on and so forth. So now we still do rely on that because we have a finite amount we can spend. We also do have an agreement with the bookstore where we borrow a certain number of textbooks each semester. Hopefully they're still in good condition, and then they're returned or borrowed again. But definitely a lot of the faculty, they're still checking in, they're making sure we have the book. Even if we purchased a copy of the book, we still rely on them a lot to come in and check and verify, well, is that the edition you use? Because we're going off of the bookstore's list. And a lot of the time the bookstore's list is good, but sometimes it's not actually the edition they're using. So.
Yes, we rely on faculty to provide the textbooks specifically. However, we have to be really strict about the copy they give us, because if it's a copy given for free by the publisher, we are not allowed to use that textbook. So oftentimes it'll be an extra copy that they have, or it's their personal copy. But if it's not a textbook and it's just a monograph, we will purchase a copy. We also, for course packs, if it's cheaper for us to buy an entire ebook or an entire print book, we'll do that rather than pay the copyright fees. So yeah, we do rely on our faculty, but with the textbook reserve program, when it was launched a couple years ago, we've been using that funding to purchase textbooks.
I think it's really interesting. If it's all right, if I just jump in, culturally, it's fascinating. It's always one of the joys coming on an international call and learning terms like superintendent president, which is a great term. King of the caretakers, that sounds like to me. So really, really interesting. Where's gold buttons? But it's fascinating because culturally, and obviously we've got Ken here to either support me or tell me I'm talking nonsense. But in the UK, culturally, if I walked into an education committee and said, we're not buying textbooks, I'd be thrown out and laughed at. We're a library, we buy books, that there's no defining that you don't buy this, you buy that. And that's part of the challenge, because it then becomes about managing expectations. And the expectation isn't that you have 3 books or one book for this many students, but that you have a book when I walk into the library and I can use it. Ken, how would you agree, disagree?
I would totally agree with you there, Andrew. And even to the extent of the really interesting there is faculty giving books to the library and textbooks. We struggle to get anything out of them in the sense of even the textbooks that they wish to use. It's an ongoing struggle where to build our reading list. So we use a reading list system, but it is a constant challenge for our liaison function to get those lists, to get an understanding of what's needed. We were typical, we had 20 copies of key text before. But what's really interesting is that even though we've reopened in some form with reduced capacity in July last year, those textbooks haven't moved now. People are just not using those print resources to anything like the same extent. So what we're now looking at is how we repurpose that space that gives us when we can withdraw 18 of those copies and leave us with 2 on the shelves. What can we do with that shelving capacity, or what can we do with reducing our print book stock and taking shelves away because of that transition that we're starting to see.
So on top of that, sorry, you go. I was just going to conclude, Susie, just from a kind of cultural, and then I will shut up, I promise. But I was just going to say, so from a UK point of view, culturally, if we've always provided the textbooks, students haven't, I'm not saying no student bought books, but they didn't buy very many. Actually, in terms from a publisher's point of view, the amount of we've always provided the textbooks, and that's been the expectation of the students. There hasn't been this huge amount of cash spent by students on textbooks in the way that it sounds like has been in the US.
You, Andrew and Ken, you bring up such a good point, and it's so true. It is a library. Why aren't we purchasing the books? And sometimes it seems like that line becomes, it's such a fine line, because I know we have a small number of librarians, and each one acts as a liaison to, certain different disciplines or majors. And so we will do these purchase lists twice a year. And I remember when I was first starting out, just thinking about what is the line between, I want to get these supplemental materials on, chemistry, but then but I'm not allowed to get the textbook. Like, how does that work? And then just learning about the history of the budget was really small, and one textbook will, eat up so much of that, versus you can get a few other, books that you can add to the academic collection. And just being I was told over and over again, we don't purchase the textbooks. We try to provide access when we can, but this is more, supplemental and support, which was so fascinating to me, because I had never really thought about it like that. I had thought, library has everything. So I guess we've been so lucky because we've been so dogged in the past years where we're like, we want it all. Like, we can't afford it all, but we're going to find a way to afford it all. So.
I think ours goes the other way. We want it all, but we've struggled to provide that breadth in recent times within our budget. We've been able to supply depth of individual content, but not necessarily that breadth of supporting material. And I think that's the risk we run going forward. Still, is actually how we maintain that breadth and scope of the collection, such that it doesn't just become core material, and that is what worries me to an extent around the way we are headed at the moment.
And then there's always that concern of like, okay, we just, purchased 2 copies of that textbook, that's $500. And then 2 years later, it's a new edition. It's like, okay, and then the space.
Yeah, I just looked at our collection management policy, and it says that we do not acquire textbooks except when they are determined to be of value to the collection. So it's not, yeah. So, and it also indicates that it's, it's the student's responsibility, not the library. So that's interesting. It's been common practice here. I mean, I've been a librarian for almost 10 years, and it's just something that it's just how we managed it. So it's really interesting to see the difference.
I'm genuinely interested in the cultural differences and not getting into we're right and you're wrong, just the reasons for the differences. And I do wonder, in terms of, historically how university education was funded. There was not a model in the UK for fees until obviously relatively recently, and I wonder if that's connected. So there was always a sense education was free, and then access, all parts of the access to education was free. So culturally, potentially, there's a difference there, and of course, we've moved in a very different direction since I was at university when it comes to loans and fees and grants. But that cultural change hasn't happened in the library world. I mean, and putting it in on top now, suddenly you've got students going, these are all these hidden costs that nobody told me about.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I was pretty recently a student, and it's crazy how it does really fall all on you to figure it out on your own in the US. Obviously, I can't speak to the UK as a student.
Correct.
But I remember the textbook reserves program at the library being a huge help. And a point of emphasis that every professor at least would mention, we have these textbooks on reserve, and grateful for that and the role that the library fills. Another topic that I think is closely related as we've approached this affordability point is this rise of OER, and I think to the cultural point, because of the way that the expenses are burdened on the student, the rise of OER has really been driven by the US. And in lots of the conversations I've had with US libraries, OERs, open educational resources, have been a real huge focus point. And I think it would be interesting to talk about kind of where those are in the different spaces. Alejandra, are you comfortable taking the lead on this one? Because I know you have lots of experience in OER, and if you could talk
absolutely.
about how that's developed.
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched an OER initiative back in 2017. And at the time, it was really hard to engage faculty because we do have an affluent student population. So a lot of the students on our campus don't have the real financial need compared to other institutions. However, in the last few years, we've been really trying to target different demographics of students and communities. And so 17% of our students receive Pell Grants, meaning that they have a financial need and need assistance in order to attend University of San Diego. So one of our initiatives was where we had to offer money. That was the only way we can get faculty on board. So we offered $1,000 stipend for faculty to replace any paid resources, so textbooks, with OER. So it didn't have to be an open textbook, any kind of OER. It could be a compilation of articles from the library database. It could be actual OER, open textbooks, anything open access. So as long as it was free for the student, they received $1,000 stipend. That was kind of big for some faculty. It was too much to take on because a lot of times you kind of have to change up your syllabus and your curriculum when you're changing the course material that you're using. So we actually had, we offered faculty a $250 stipend to find an open textbook within their pedagogical field and write a review on the textbook. And fortunately, we actually had one faculty member who really liked the textbook they used and was able to get a few other faculty teaching the same section to use that same textbook, that open textbook. So it saved students quite a bit of money, especially if it's in the sciences. Science textbooks tend to be pretty expensive. We are members of a consortium here in California known as SCELC, and they actually joined the Open Education Network. It was formerly Open Textbook Network. And so we are members of OEN. And so we're able to use those reviews and submit them to the Open Textbook Library, which has been really helpful for our faculty. And I believe half of the faculty that submitted reviews are actually planning on using at least a portion of that open textbook, which is a good gateway to introducing faculty to textbooks.
Sorry, I was on mute. Susie, do you have anything that you want to add? And then Andrew and Ken, if one of you wants to just jump in with the UK side of things, because as I understand it, open educational resources are in a very different place in the UK library, and it's becoming more of a point of emphasis.
Yeah, I think similar to Alejandra's experience, probably about 2017, 2018, there were a number of state local grants that pertain to OER to try to, or ZTC, zero textbook cost initiatives, where it didn't necessarily, so an instructor could get a special designation on the course catalog online if their entire course material cost was less than a certain threshold. It was a pretty low amount, or if they were somehow going to provide the materials for students at low or no cost. And so faculty were recruited that way to say, hey, would you be willing to adopt an OER or adopt materials at very low cost for your students? Let's try it out. Let's see how it goes. And a number of faculty were involved, and not all, but some of those same faculty continued to use those OERs or continue to use, develop course packs, which would be at no cost or very low cost to the students, which was very exciting because the librarians also set up, as part of this, we set up weekly drop-in hours where, faculty and staff could come in and ask us, everything you ever wanted to know about OER. So we were somewhat versed in it, but we really had to, take a crash course and try to educate ourselves as much as possible. We did develop a LibGuide based off of another fantastic LibGuide from a library in Washington. And, we were checking into the repositories. We would have faculty who would email us and would say, hey, I'm teaching this kind of class. I'm teaching communications class. I'm teaching, a nursing class. I'm teaching biology class. Do you have any recommendations for OERs? And sometimes we could point to a specific textbook, and sometimes the textbook just didn't seem to be widely available. So we would work with them and say, let's look at the commons. Let's see what kind of materials you can adopt and import into your Canvas shell. Canvas is our learning management system. And in that way, I know faculty told us that it got the ball rolling for them, and they got excited about it. They were curious, and they continued to look for ways to make sure that their course materials were accessible to students. And that's actually been a really big push too at our college the last couple of years, this idea of equity and this idea of access. And so it's been really nice that the library's efforts have been rolled into that.
Sorry to jump in. Yes, that's really been critical for us too. So we are in the midst of trying to become an HSI, a Hispanic Serving Institution. And in order to become a Hispanic Serving Institution, we need to have at least 25% of our students identify as Latinx. And so we've been doing a big push on that and talking about the equity behind textbooks, because 2/3 of students do not purchase textbooks because they cannot afford it. And so we really are trying to drive that home to our faculty. So thank you for bringing that up, Susie.
Can I jump in? And that's really interesting, that final point. 2/3 of your students can't afford textbooks, but the library doesn't provide textbooks.
It is, and a lot of it is because of the funding. I mean, we struggle to get funding as it is for our, with inflationary increases with our electronic resources, we can't afford, we don't have discretionary funds to purchase textbooks. So yeah, it's a bit of a juggle.
But on the other side of it, the OER, that sounds amazing, the work you've been doing. And in the UK, Ken, it's a bit different for us, isn't it?
Yeah, you're probably better placed to speak with your previous experience with university presses, because we really don't have certain. I'd say we're probably where you were probably pre-2017, Alejandra, before you even started it. I'd say is we're not even at that. Certainly in Portsmouth, we're not even at that launchpad stage yet.
And I wonder how you can, because with us, we can talk to faculty and tell them, like, this is the one thing you can control in terms of the amount of money our students, it's the one aspect that we control. But for faculty, how do you talk to them and say, like, hey, help the library out, help us save money? How do it's finding a way to start a conversation with faculty and have them find interest in it.
I think that goes back to that real cultural difference of what we're expected to provide, because the expectation from the faculty is that we provide that, so they don't actually need to worry about the funding of that. I had a conversation recently with one of the deans of the faculty around electronic resources and potentially additional funding, and her approach is, well, the library budget, the library funds here are top sliced. We don't have any additional faculty funds for things of that nature, and that's where you're absolutely right, Alejandra. There's no way you can start that conversation with that type of approach, really.
And Andrew, what is I guess sometimes we have grants here, but I didn't know about looking for grants, and I felt like I stumbled onto it sometimes, and it's not well advertised, and some of the grants we started getting, it was really great working with the deans and faculty, but for some of these grants, they had never used it before on the textbook or with library materials. And some, we just figured it couldn't be used, and someone looked into it and said, yeah, you can use it. But what is the situation with grants in the UK? Is that very different from here, or are grants pretty plentiful, or is that something the library uses often, or it's different system?
Yeah, I think probably different system from my experience. We get money through at Lancaster through an annual planning process where I just outline what I want for the year, and say we need this, we need that, and you either get it, you get some of it, or you get none of it, depending on what you're asking for and the justification. There might be times through the year if something special comes, you could work with a senior manager, a senior leadership executive team member to get some sponsorship to try and put a bid in for additional money. But there's certainly nothing that exists in the grand form that you describe. I think what's really interesting about the OER point from a UK point of view is I feel it's a little bit like open access. That's the challenge. Unless you've got the validation of a publisher, it can feel a little bit homemade. So when we did work at Liverpool with Liverpool University Press, the inbuilt benefit there was you were working with the third oldest university publisher in the UK. That brings some clout in a way that University of X Press just invented doesn't. So really good piece of work at Liverpool. I won't bore you with it now because I did mention at the start, I also chair an organisation called UKSG, and there's a UKSG webinar recently recorded from Liverpool, not by me, by people who are at the university about that project. And it's easy to find, it's free to access, and it's interesting. But the challenge is now, no academic would want to write a book say a textbook for X University Press because it just has no value. It just feels homemade.
It's whether that will change though, Andrew, with the RCUK open access policy that is notionally due out later this summer, which is talking about open access monographs by 2024, whether that will start to have an impact. I'm a bit cynical about that myself. I think it will, but I think the timescale is too short for that to have an impact. I don't think it'll be starting to be seen by 2024 is my opinion on that. But
I mean, again, in terms of, I mean, we'll see, because the devil's in the detail, and as Ken said, there's a lot to come out later in the summer on that. But I think I'm probably cynical too, and there's a lot needed in terms of investment from universities, of money and time, or at least funding bodies for money and time. It's again culturally different, though, isn't it? Fascinating that OER would work in a way in the States where I just think people will be cynical about it in the UK. Maybe I'm cynical. I'm the problem.
Well, I don't think you are, Andrew. I know we're starting in Portsmouth now to look at our digital success plan. So how we move forward in that area, and part of that is referencing the creation of OERs. But there's going to be real difficulties around there, and that is about time as much as anything, and time and status, because so much in these fields, particularly open access, in whatever form it is, a lot of it is how it ties to people's careers and career progression, and that is one of the things with that. If we want to make OER successful, there has to be a recognition of the work that goes into creating them, and I think that will be one of our challenges to overcome that hurdle.
That was the challenge at Liverpool, really, to take it beyond a JISC-funded project to a university-funded project. And there is a successful textbook. Well, there's two, but there's one that I think's gone really well from this project that's still used. And again, it's on that webinar if you want to know more details. But like Ken, we've just developed and created a new library vision where we talk about moving from curating content to creating dynamic collections. I mean, it's a vision, so it's broad, and we have to look at what that means. But I think it's as Ken says, it's looking into what role we can play in that sphere.
That's still an issue here in the US, at least at our institution, with publishing and open access, or developing an OER and the tenure process. So that we're still dealing with that here as well. Oftentimes I've been trying to actually reach out to just tenured faculty, because I know that tenured track faculty are less likely to try to publish in open access journals, especially if it's a smaller publishing company. If it's a university press or Elsevier, they'll do it, but for the most part they have their hesitations, and rightly so, because there's still that idea or that concept that it's not high quality pedagogical resources. Yeah.
So one thing that I've just been hearing in the conversation is we've been talking a lot about the relationship with faculty, and the differences in the two spaces. So I'm just going to say what I think my understanding has been coming out of it, is that in the US there is this closer relationship with curation with faculty, where working with faculty on what textbooks are being used, how they're being used in the course, and a bit more of a back and forth. And whereas in the UK, it seems that there's more of a one-way stream where the library is sort of expected to have the resources that the faculty need, and provisioning them. In that sense, just curious if that's right, how that looks in each space. If that makes sense.
I know for us, the big thing is there is that line where we can encourage faculty and reach out to some and say, hey, would you be interested in learning more about OERs? But academic freedom is a big thing here. So at no point could we ever, it would never be our place to tell the faculty, like, you can't use that book or use this one. So when there are efforts to do OER, it's always very broad. And it's, there's always this disclaimer, like, no one's telling you what to use, but if you're interested, we're happy to, go with you on this journey to learn more. But once a text is selected, absolutely, then it becomes, part of our, we're trying to seek it out. So part of our goal there is to say, okay, that's the text that faculty member is using. What can we do to ensure that we have that available for the students?
I think that's a really interesting point, especially on academic freedom, Susie. I mean, it's one way that we're trying to do it, and we have had some good success here, is to say, yes, that's fine. That's fine if you want that textbook on your reading list. We won't be able to get you a copy because it'll cost, or access it because it'll cost this much money. So if you want to do it, fine. Alternatively, we could get you this, which is slightly cheaper, and we could actually get it in this instance. And that's the way that we try and navigate it through with charm as we do it.
That is so interesting too, because it's like the faculty go to the bookstore requisitions the titles, and then we go to the bookstore, but then at the same time we're also trying to open channels to the faculty and say, oh, by the way, what did you submit to the bookstore, and can we make sure we get that, and did they get the right one? So because there have been some times where we go according to the bookstore list, and the faculty will come in and they'll say, that's not the book I submitted, or that's not the edition, what's going on? Like,
yeah, no, we try to use academic freedom to our advantage, where I say, like, well, wouldn't you rather, use an open textbook that is free for students? You don't use the entire textbook that you require anyway. So what if you just find a few chapters from the different textbooks? But it's the extra work, they are stretched thin sometimes. But yeah, we work with the bookstore in a sense where if we know they're going to use an OER, we tell them to still let the textbook or let the campus bookstore know. And if it falls under the right Creative Commons licensing, they will print copies for students who prefer the print, because the majority of our students still prefer print, and for a nominal fee. They don't charge very much because it's black and white usually. So if students want to get the print copy, they can purchase it for, instead of reading it online.
So can I just say, I don't know if people can hear, but my daughter's playing music in the kitchen while she's cooking. So if that's noise, she's currently playing, it's a nice connection here. She's currently playing the Beach Boys' Sloop John B, which of course famously is on Pet Sounds, image of which was taken at the San Diego Zoo. So there's a nice link there. But I do apologize.
I can't hear it. I don't know if anybody else can, though. I wish I could. That sounds entertaining background music. We could, pretend it's just part of the what we're doing. We're creating ambiance in the background of the vodcast.
Well, you could probably hear a couple kids screaming downstairs because they're.
Yay! That's what I like.
Well, I'm sat in the office, so I've got the traffic noise of Portsmouth behind me. So, luckily, it's not foggy here, because you would hear the foghorns. Because it's one of the nice accompaniments to lots of days sitting in this office is the foghorns.
Yeah. Birthplace of Charles Dickens.
Indeed. I have been to the museum as well. Sadly, we don't have much of an archive of him. We do have the institutional archive, but it is an institutional one. It's not that interesting. But we are starting to look at more special collections. We just received one a big donation this morning, which is going to form a new special collection for us, which is children's books in translation, and that's going to be a stunning little Connect collection that it is. So.
I'm fascinated by special collections and archives, and there's a nice segue. The e-textbook we published was using primary sources about special collections and archives.
Yeah.
So you thought we were going off the e-textbook discussion, but we were.
That's super interesting. What can you tell me, but just for my learnings, like when you say special collections, what does that mean? Because that's a bit of a new or a term for me, at least.
Is that? I'm suggesting your faces of your colleagues below aren't necessarily agreeing. And as I said to the Americans, do not have special collections?
No, we do. We do.
We do also.
So what we're defining them as is really our key collections that have a specific purpose. So our special collections that we have here in Portsmouth, we've got the map library collection, which has a lot of historical mapping, including some fantastic KGB maps of Portsmouth. That it is our rare books collection, although I would argue a lot, and I do argue with colleagues that lots of them aren't rare, but that's historically I have managed a truly rare books collection. The new one that we're bringing in, and the institutional archive. So they're all things that have a very specific purpose, and generally more of a research purpose, is the way that we're using that definition.
Yeah, we use the term UDC a lot as well, unique and distinct collections. So I would say, Brian, if you walked into my library, Ken's library, and other libraries in the UK, there's a lot you'd find exactly the same. Special collections and archives are where you find what only Portsmouth has and what only Lancaster has, etc. Special collections are different. Archives are where you'd find material that's only held by that institution.
And is that is that exactly the case in the UK and the US as well? The kind of separation and uniformity, or is it slightly different in your libraries?
Usually especially in the academic libraries or special libraries or museum libraries, if there's a unique collection of historic significance, cultural significance, like many academic libraries, if you go up to the second, third, fourth, fifth floor, you're going to find special collections and archives. And that's where, like at my undergrad, up on the fourth floor, you'd find special collections, and in there are local maps, there are materials from donors, individuals who played a historic role in the town, city, county. But then they also have other donations, like they had a page from the Gutenberg Bible, they had recordings from the late 19th century. So it just depends on the size of the library as well as the scope of their collections.
The UK is not as good as the US in terms of archive collections, because the tendency was that American universities bought them all. It's true. Philip Larkin, the Port Librarian, presented on to a Sconnell conference on that in the late 1970s, how we were losing so many of our archives to American universities, who, I'm sure, the big ones who would throw millions at the authors.
That's funny. So I know we're getting toward the end of time. There's about 11 minutes left. So one thing that I know people on the webinar are very keen to hear more of, from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, was just, could you each share highlight one strategy that you think, from what you've heard today, like the other kinds of institutions could benefit from? So it's one strategy that you've implemented or that you're really proud of at your library that you think another library could really benefit from hearing, if that makes sense.
A strategy having to do with OERs or ebooks or anything?
anything that you think is worth highlighting, just something like a concrete takeaway, really, for somebody who's listening or watching.
I think for me, it would be take opportunities. So this past 18 months has been really tough on everyone. But actually what we've found here in Portsmouth is some of the things we had to do because of lockdown and being closed for a period were things that we'd had almost as pipe dreams in terms of process changes. So although there's elements of chaos and there's real elements of difficulty, there are also opportunities in there. And the takeaway for me from this past year really is to remain open to those opportunities.
I think that's a super point, and we've all learnt so much and done so much and learnt a lot about, and this I think is a segue possibly to mine, learnt a lot about our institutions and our libraries. So I think for me, a broad takeaway is learn and understand the culture of your university and the role it plays within the local area and the role that the library plays within your local area. So I certainly know through the last year, we did things at Lancaster that wouldn't have worked in a Liverpool or a Manchester. We've been open, we've been 24/7 as a buildings all the way through term time, pretty much as normal. And we put activities in, and we have thought differently about the way we engage with the students and the local area in terms of some of the community engagement. And I think for me, the takeaway is we've got a new library vision, most of which is tied to the fact we want to be a university library for Lancaster. So the lesson for me has been understand the role you play within the university and see how you can enhance that and maximize it. It's possibly a bit nebulous, but it's been a really important one for me.
Let's see. So I think similar to both Andrew and Ken, what we learned a lot in the last year and a half. We had to be extremely flexible, but we made sure that the students were taken care of in terms of providing them access to all of the resources we possibly could. Even if it wasn't available in electronic form, we found a way to get it to them. So we really had to modify a lot of our workflows in seconds, and being able to be there for the students was really big for us, and I feel like we were very successful. There's a couple key components and services that I think we're gonna end up keeping long term. So we had curbside pickup because the library was closed for a good 6 months. And so if someone wanted to check out a book, they could drive up and they had a drop off. We would drop it off to them, or the staff that were on campus would drop it off to them. So I think we're going to maintain that service. Along with the mailing, we would mail out certain books to students and faculty who weren't in San Diego County. So we think that was really great that our access services and outreach librarian thought of that and really made it a successful service to our patrons.
Yeah, I think like everyone before me has already said, just emphasizing the importance of adopting and adapting to change, but also keeping our core principles and our outcomes in mind, and just, being open to embracing new things, including technology that will still help the students. So whether that's adopting later hours for the library research help chat, or whether that's looking for ways to make sure students can access their textbooks in print or online. It's a good thing. It's important to stay relevant to the students and adapt and change according to what the students need. The collections are going to change according to student interests and the academic subjects students are interested in, and we we've learned that we have to not only be okay with that, but we have to, be excited about that. Like, hey, we need a new service. Great. That's just going to help the students, and thus it's going to continue to help the library thrive as this important center of campus and the community.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I mean, there's so many services we've brought about, and it's been good for the library actually, because there were certain things that weren't rocket science that we were doing, like LibChat, which most of you will be doing anyway. But the rest of the university saw it as if we were, creating magic. It was astounding to see, and that's enhanced our position on the campus, I think, as innovators, and how we managed, to so easily transform digitally. So it's been good for the reputation.
As has being able to remain open, where so many other spaces were unable to be open for a number of reasons. And I think that from our looking at how the students are reacting, I think that's a real positive in ours going forward, is that they see that we did our absolute best to remain a service for them.
To jump in, is a university, campus university, if you're going to demonstrate to people we are open, how do you best demonstrate that? Having 700 people sat studying in a building that normally would have double that amount. I had one member of the student union say to me yesterday how grateful she and her friends were that we could keep the library open throughout it all. It's been hugely important to just, we've kept calm and carry on to follow up that cliche. You wouldn't expect anything else from us. We're British.
I know.
I guess for the end, Susie and Alejandra, what have your experiences been with reopening? Or have you also managed to stay open? Because I think that's been another difference from my conversations is, surviving while not being able to have students. Alejandra, you mentioned the shipping and the drive-through pickup type strategies. How are you managing the transition back to being in person to some extent, and how much of what was being done before is remaining in place now that you're shifting back almost?
Alejandra, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can go first.
Sure.
So we actually are open. We've been open since I want to say October, maybe we reopened, or maybe September. We reopened, but only for students and faculty and employees of USC. You had to show your ID, and we had to move chairs around. And then just recently we opened to the whole campus community. And just, I think 2 days ago, it's now mask optional if you are vaccinated. If you're not, you have to wear a mask. So we are open, but we are still asking that if you reserve a group study room, you only have one student in there at one time. So we're still pretty strict with the physical distancing. But the staff and access services have been wonderful in making sure that students feel welcome, and safe, with the pandemic.
Yeah, we're still figuring out exactly how fall is going to look. So we were, even though the library doors were locked for a little bit, our services still remained. So I know there was this perception at first, like, oh no, the library is closed. And we're like, no. The services are still available. And we actually increased the services we were offering. Like we had pushed in the years before to try to be open 6 days a week. That's not good enough. We want to be open 7 days a week. How can we do that? Please help us. So when we had to physically lock the doors briefly, we pushed to extend our chat hours and our Zoom hours, so that we were offering research help hours between 6 a.m. and 12 midnight most days. So we're like, well, we want to assure the students, the staff, the faculty, the community that you can still reach us. You can set up appointments. Students could still make up pretty soon after after the initial closing in March, students could make appointments and come and pick up materials that they had put holds on. And then fairly soon after that, we opened up our lobby for a study space by appointment. Now just anyone can walk in. I think right now still the emphasis is on, for walk-ins, priority should be given to students. So students will come in, sign in, put down their student ID card number, and then they can work within the lobby, but now they can also work within the entire library. Right now, our stacks are temporarily closed because our school just voted to, I believe, lift the emergency ban. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what restrictions are on campus, because campus-wide, students, staff, and faculty are being told you need to wear your mask unless you have provided proof of vaccination. So we're still trying to get the word for what fall will look like exactly, but we're back open again. The checkout circulation desk is open. We have plexiglass up. The reference desk is open. We do have a couple of plexiglass barriers up, but summer tends to be a little bit slower anyway than the other semesters, so not as many students there. But we're planning for a more fall of 2021 to look much more like fall of 2019 in terms of being open.